Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Unauthorized TV. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry I wasn't able to do a recording last night, although I did appear on Owen's stream. We had some rain, and it knocked out the fuse that I required for my light, so I had to come up with another solution. So we're all good for tonight and for the future, but that was technical difficulties, you might say. So tonight I'm going to talk about Ricardo Retardo and the flight from debt. That sounds a little esoteric, I suppose, but it's actually pretty simple. I was talking to Big Bear about free trade, the problem of free trade, the challenge of debating dialectic issues in front of a rhetorical audience, and so forth. And he was frankly just laughing at my inability to speak the language of persuasion. I was expressing my frustration that you can be debating something with an economist, and they're just spitting orthodox dogma, something that literally everyone knows, and yet people will find it convincing just because they pronounce it with this air of sincerity, and they do it. They find it convincing despite the fact that the Orthodox have literally no answer for these substantive criticisms and these conclusively devastating rejections of the theory, practical rejections of these theoretical arguments that in some cases have been around for 200 years. And they haven't been around for 200 years because they're good arguments. They've been known to be bad arguments for 200 years. And beyond that, 200 years ago, it was mostly theory. But now we've had the ability to actually test out whether those theories are valid or not. And they're very clearly not. They're absolutely not. You can argue all you want about, for example, immigration being good for the economy. Well, we've had 50 years of immigration since 1965, and guess what? The economy has been growing slower over that 50 years than just about any 50-year period preceding it, including the decade of the Great Depression. Think about that for a minute. Now, obviously, you can line up a 10-year section in various ways and manipulate the truth and so forth. But on average, the period of great immigration in recent years has also coincided with slower than historical average economic growth. And yet, people still spit out this dogma, repeat the orthodox line with absolutely no thought behind it. It's just totally mindless. And that's when Big Bear said quite reasonably and quite credibly, I would have just said, Ricardo Retardo, and everybody would have cheered. And he's right, because persuasion is not about facts. Persuasion is not about information. Persuasion is about emotion and about getting people on your side. And that's one of the reasons why I try to stay out of the kind of internet drama that we're seeing right now with regards to Milo's article about Lauren Southern and some various figures on the alt-right and so forth. What's the point? People have their fans. Those fans are going to back those e-celebs or those individuals, whether they're right or wrong for the most part. Unless you do something that is fundamentally shameful in the eyes of your followers and your fans, unless you reveal yourself to be something other than people expect you to be, a lot of people just have a tendency to follow the leader. And that's fine. That's normal. There's for 2,400 years, philosophers have been writing about this phenomenon. It's not something that should disturb, surprise, or disappoint us. It can be frustrating. I find it frustrating, but it's the way that it is. And so one of the things that I'm attempting to learn from my rhetorical superiors, people like Donald Trump, people like Big Bear, people like Milo, people who are masters of rhetorical communication. I'm trying to learn at least how they do it. I'll probably never be able to do it myself. I'm too old and set in my ways. You're going to be stuck with esoteric dialectic as long as I'm writing books and doing videos, I'm afraid. Which means, of course, that the appeal will always be limited. There's always going to be a much smaller group of people interested in information and actual analysis, as opposed to cheerleading, persuasion, manipulation, wizardry, whatever you want to call it. There's a reason why nobody actually pays any attention to anything that someone like Stephen Hawking ever said. He was an icon, he was a symbol, but if you asked the average Big Bang, Bill Nye the Science Guy enthusiast what Stephen Hawking had ever done, had ever accomplished, they would have no idea. In fact, I bet you that most of them would say that he won the Nobel Prize in physics. They might not even say physics. They might just say Nobel Prize. And, of course, I should look it up. I don't think he ever did actually win a Nobel Prize. I'm actually going to look that up here. Let's see here. Nope, he did not. Why Stephen Hawking never won a Nobel Prize. Now, keep in mind, I'm not a fan, and I've never paid much attention to Stephen Hawking. But even I knew he never won a Nobel Prize, although I did have to check just to make sure I wasn't setting myself up for correction there. That's one of the bad things about having a very good, though not eidetic memory, is that you have the ability to get yourself in trouble because you remember something and you're pretty sure you remember it clearly, but you're not entirely sure. And so that it's always kind of funny because there's some folks who can remember exactly what a book says, like what it says on the page. And for some reason, I can't ever remember exactly what it says, but I can almost always, and I don't remember the exact page number, but if I've read it in an actual book, I can remember essentially what it said, and I can usually go to the book and flip right to it. But that's one of the bad things about ebooks is, on the one hand, you can look stuff up very easily. On the other hand, that ability to remember where in the book something is becomes completely useless. So that's a little disappointing. Fortunately, I still like to read actual books. But man, having a tablet is so handy. Anyhow, to get on to what we're talking about with Ricardo Retardo and the flight from debt, this is actually going to connect and make sense. Just bear with me. I was reading today about a young man who graduated from college with a fair amount of college debt, student debt, about $30,000 worth. And of course, he can't get rid of it. Any other type of debt, you know, credit card debt, housing debt, whatever, you can get out of it. You might have to give up your house. You might have to give up your lease, your car, but you can shed it. But thanks to the evil morons in the U.S. Congress, they banned the ability to shed your student debt. You can't get rid of it. And so what this young man has done, and what I've heard a number of other young Americans have done, is that they just left the country. This guy went off to China, and he taught as an English language teacher for a while. And then he went, I think he went to Ukraine or something. He's working there. But what I found fascinating about it is that this is exactly what the free traders want, in theory. Because the benefits of free trade stem from labor mobility. It's the efficiency of marrying labor to the place where that labor is most efficient. So, for example, if you happen to be a genius at robotics, and the most efficient place to build robots turns out to be in South Korea, then in order to optimize your talent, in order to optimize the labor and the capital and the marriage of the two, then to maximize economic output and grow the economy optimally, the system will ideally encourage you, force you, convince you to move to South Korea and work there in your, not just your chosen field, but in your optimal field. And that's why the USA is believed to have a more robust economic growth than the European Union, excuse me, is because there's more labor mobility within the United States. It's about 3 times higher than in Europe, 3.5 times higher than in Europe. And this was what the purpose of the European Union was initially sold as a free trade zone, so that labor could move around. Poles could move to England and become janitors. Germans could move their automotive factories to Spain, where the workers are less expensive. And this was going to make the operation and the marriage of labor and capital more efficient, grow the economy, etc., etc. But there's a major problem. It destroys family connections, it destroys community, etc., etc. And so this is the big battle from an economics perspective between nationalism, community, and family on the one side, and optimal economic growth on the other. But here's where the really interesting contradiction comes in. The economists depend on debt. Debt is what creates growth. At this point in time, you can actually measure how many dollars of debt are required in order to generate a specific amount of growth. And one of the problems of the post-2008 economy has been that the amount of debt that's required to achieve a point of economic growth has increased over that period of time. It's getting more and more difficult to find debt, to find people willing to get into debt, and in order to spend the money to consume to bring about the economic growth. So that's why you've seen this huge expansion of debt. That's why even kids can borrow money to credit cards and lease cars and so forth. But the system is beginning to contradict itself. And what's really funny is the people that are criticizing these young Americans who are leaving the country in order to avoid having to make their debt payments, they're actually appealing to the very arguments, to the very things, the nationalism, the family, the community. They're trying to appeal to those things in order to keep people from running out on their student debt. And I find that massively ironic because, on the other hand, they're saying, well, you shouldn't leave in order to get out of debt, but you should leave in order to maximize your economic efficiency so that the economy can grow. And so you've got this really bizarre structural contradiction which has been created by the government. It's been created by the U.S. government because they made debt impossible to get out of. But then they've also encouraged relatively free trade, which makes it impossible for these people to graduate from college and get a job working in their hometown. And so these kind of contradictions suggest to me that we are continually moving closer to that general economic political collapse that I've been expecting for some time. At this point, that a lot of people are expecting. Again, it doesn't mean the world's going to end. It doesn't mean that Hitler 2.0 is going to take over. It just means that things are going to change. They're not going to be the same as they are going forward in some way. We don't know how it's going to shake out. What they've recreated metaphorically is a form of serfdom tied to the debt. It used to be that serfs were tied to the land. They were not allowed to leave the land that they were working for the benefit of their feudal master. And then there were these, towns, cities were set up, and they were called free towns and free cities because if you could sneak away from your land and get to the town, then you would become a free man and you broke the tie to the land. So it's interesting to see that in some ways, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, instead of fleeing the land of your feudal master and going to a free city so that you can free yourself of your feudal obligations, now we're seeing people fleeing their debts from their banking master, which in this case, because it's guaranteed by the government, is essentially the national government. They're fleeing that and going into another jurisdiction that allows them to practically, functionally sever that obligation. I mean, yes, the obligation still technically remains, but not as long as they're willing to give up the very stuff that the free traders are demanding that they give up anyhow. So I think you can see that when you've got these kind of contradictions, then you've got a system that is going to stop functioning. How and when, it's impossible to say. But, these things tend to go on a lot longer than the pessimists imagine they can. But once they break down, they tend to break down a lot faster than anybody, the optimists or the pessimists, believe possible. Now, it doesn't matter that 2 or 3 or 500 college graduates go off and teach English in China or serve as mercenaries in Angola or whatever it is that they do. It doesn't matter if a few people do that, but it is going to matter significantly if enough people begin doing that so that it starts making a noticeable percentage of those loans unrecoverable. And that's why I think that it would be very wise for President Trump and for the Republicans to start looking at some kind of very serious student debt amnesty, because that which cannot be paid, that which cannot be repaid, is not going to be repaid. And pretending that it will be is only going to lead to a more catastrophic breakdown once it gets to whatever the critical mass of inability to repay happens to be. Again, I don't know what it is. Nobody knows what it is. But the one certainty is that reality always wins in the end. As somebody said on the blog the other day, reality is undefeated. And we can claim that men are women and cats are dogs, and a college graduate who doesn't have a job is going to be able to pay $400 a month for the rest of his life. But it's not so. And eventually, reality is going to punch through the web of lies, the web of delusions, the web of self-deceptions with which we're operating. So anyhow, I hope that's been at least thought-provoking. And I'll look forward to seeing you the next time. We've got some great stuff coming on Unauthorized. Really appreciate the way, dozens of people are continuing to subscribe every day. And, it's great because it allows us to make some really exciting plans for the future. And I can say, I'm not going to say too much about it, but we are actively beginning work on our first documentary. It's going to be the first unauthorized documentary. And it's going to be a fun one. It's going to be cool. And I think people, not only are people going to like it, but don't be surprised if you see TV channels and stuff picking it up, because it's just going to be some interesting cultural artifacts, let's put it that way. I should also mention thanks to all the bears who subscribed yesterday. Over 1,000 of you subscribed in the last 24 hours, and we're now past YouTube's magic 30,000 figure. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, that was not enough to make the channel eligible yet for members only chat. So I don't know what else we have to do. I don't know if we have to wait 24 hours for YouTube to pay attention, or maybe they've just decided that that it won't be eligible in any case. I have no idea. But regardless, I still appreciate it. I'm glad that that you've come on board, and I hope that we'll see you checking out the channel from time to time in the future. So have a good evening. This is the Darkstream. I'm Voxday.